The auditorium reeked of burning metal. The $2 million supercar shuddered violently, then started smoking right there on stage. Camera flashes went crazy, reporters shouted, and in the middle of the chaos, the CEO's voice rang out, "Fix this in 10 minutes and I'll marry you." The entire hall erupted in laughter. Only one person wasn't laughing. Jack Turner, a poor mechanic, single dad, 35 years old. He gripped his silver wrench tight and stepped onto the stage. Jack Turner was 35 years old, a single father trying to rebuild his life after losing everything that mattered. His wife Sarah had died from a heart condition 3 years ago. The medical bills had drained their savings. Their small garage business had gone bankrupt. Now it was just Jack and 8-year-old Maya, struggling to survive. Jack had been a skilled mechanic, running his own shop with Sarah. They'd fixed everything from family cars to racing engines. But when Sarah got sick, Jack spent all his time at the hospital instead of under the hood. After the funeral, creditors seized the garage. Jack was left with nothing but his tools and a daughter who asked every night when Mommy was coming home. The only job he could find was at Aurora Motors, not as a mechanic, but as a maintenance assistant. Cleaning tools, sweeping floors, tasks that required no skill, paid minimum wage, and reminded him daily how far he'd fallen. Maya tried to make him feel better. Last month, she'd given him a small silver wrench she'd bought with her allowance money. She'd had it engraved with one word: love. "Daddy," she'd said with 8-year-old seriousness, "this is so you remember that fixing things is your superpower. And I love your superpower." Jack carried that wrench everywhere, a reminder of what he used to be and why he kept going. At Aurora Motors, the other employees treated him like he was invisible. They called him the cleaner, or that broke guy. During lunch, they sat together discussing engineering problems while Jack ate alone at a corner table. The worst part wasn't the low pay or the boring work. It was being surrounded by engines and knowing he could solve problems that stumped their best engineers. But nobody would listen to a janitor. Yesterday had been particularly brutal. Jack was organizing tools in the prep area when he glimpsed the blueprints for the new Aurora GT supercar. Something caught his eye immediately. The oil valve placement was wrong, completely wrong. If that car ran under stress, the valve would overheat and cause a catastrophic system failure. Jack studied the design more carefully. This wasn't just a minor flaw. This was dangerous. The kind of mistake that could cause fires, explosions, or worse. He approached the lead engineer, Marcus, during their break. "Excuse me, sir. I noticed something about the Aurora GT design." Marcus looked up from his coffee with barely concealed annoyance. "You noticed something? You're a janitor." "I used to run a garage. I know engines. There's a problem with the oil valve position that could—" "Listen, tool cleaner," Marcus interrupted, loud enough for nearby engineers to hear. "Your job is to wipe down wrenches, not give technical advice. Stick to what you know." Laughter rippled through the group. Jack's face burned with humiliation, but he persisted. "If this car runs at full capacity during the demo, it's going to fail, maybe dangerously." "Security," Marcus called out. "Can someone escort the maintenance guy back to his mop bucket?" More laughter. A security guard approached, ready to remove Jack from the engineering area. Jack retreated, clutching Maya's silver wrench in his pocket. But as he walked away, he heard Marcus telling his colleagues, "Can you believe that? A broke mechanic trying to tell us how to design supercars." That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the flawed design, about tomorrow's big press event, about what would happen when that car inevitably broke down in front of hundreds of reporters and investors. Maya found him sitting at their kitchen table, staring at his tools. "Daddy, are you okay?" Jack looked at his daughter and thought about Sarah. She'd always told him to do the right thing, even when it was hard. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about work." "Will you use your superpower tomorrow?" Jack touched the silver wrench she'd given him. "Maybe, Maya. Maybe." If you see a poor mechanic being humiliated by an entire engineering team, do you think he could turn the whole situation around? Share this story and subscribe to see what happens next. Where are you watching this from? The day of the Aurora GT launch arrived with all the fanfare Aurora Motors could muster. The showroom had been transformed into a high-tech theater. Spotlights created dramatic shadows. A massive screen displayed the company logo. VIP guests filled premium seating while reporters crowded the media section. This wasn't just a car launch. It was Aurora Motors' attempt to compete with Tesla and Ferrari. The Aurora GT represented 5 years of development and $200 million in investment. Selena Moore commanded the stage like she owned the world. At 28, she was everything the business magazines celebrated. Brilliant, beautiful, and absolutely ruthless. Her tight red dress and confident smile projected power and sex appeal in equal measure. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "today you'll witness the future of automotive engineering. The Aurora GT isn't just a supercar, it's a revolution." The crowd applauded as a curtain dropped, revealing the stunning vehicle. Sleek black carbon fiber body, butterfly doors, an engine that promised 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. Jack watched from the backstage area, organizing tools nobody would use. He'd been assigned to cleanup duty during the event, basically staying out of sight until it was time to sweep up. But he couldn't take his eyes off that car. The same flawed design he'd tried to warn them about was sitting there, waiting to humiliate Aurora Motors in front of the world. "Now," Selena continued, "let's see what $2 million of engineering excellence looks like in action." She climbed into the driver's seat with practiced elegance, making sure the cameras captured her best angles. The engine started smoothly, purring with expensive precision. For 30 seconds, everything was perfect. Then Jack heard it, a subtle whine from the oil system, the same sound he'd heard 1,000 times in his garage when pressure was building where it shouldn't. The engine note changed, became rougher. The smooth purr turned into an angry growl. Selena's confident smile faltered as warning lights began flashing on the dashboard. She pressed the accelerator, trying to power through whatever was happening. That was the worst possible decision. The oil valve, overheating exactly as Jack had predicted, finally gave way. Black smoke poured from the engine bay. The electronic systems, overwhelmed by the cascade failure, froze completely. The Aurora GT, Aurora Motors' $2 million masterpiece, died spectacularly in front of 300 witnesses and countless livestream viewers. The showroom fell silent except for the acrid smell of burning metal and the soft hiss of escaping fluids. Selena sat in the disabled car, her face cycling through shock, embarrassment, and rage. Camera flashes exploded around her like strobe lights, capturing every moment of the disaster. Marcus and his engineering team rushed onto the stage, frantically trying to diagnose the problem. They connected diagnostic computers, checked fuses, tested connections, all the high-tech solutions they'd been trained to trust. Nothing worked. The car remained dead. "It must be a computer virus," Marcus announced desperately. "Someone hacked our systems." "Could be a network intrusion," another engineer suggested. "Cyber warfare against the automotive industry." Jack watched their panic with grim satisfaction. They were looking for complex explanations for a simple mechanical problem. All their degrees and certifications couldn't help them understand what any experienced mechanic would see immediately. The silence stretched on. Reporters started whispering among themselves. Investors checked their phones, probably calculating how much Aurora Motors stock was about to lose. That's when Selena made her fatal mistake. Still sitting in the failed car, she spotted Jack standing in the backstage area. Her eyes locked onto his work clothes, his oil-stained hands, his obvious status as someone unimportant. In her desperation and humiliation, she decided to deflect attention by creating a moment of cruel entertainment. "You know what?" she called out, her voice carrying clearly through her wireless microphone. "This is supposed to be the most sophisticated car ever built. Our engineers have PhDs from MIT and Stanford." She pointed directly at Jack. "If that mechanic over there, a guy who cleans our tools for minimum wage, if he can fix what our experts can't, I'll marry him right now." The showroom erupted in laughter. The tension broke as everyone focused on the ridiculous spectacle of the glamorous CEO mocking a poor maintenance worker. Seriously, Selena continued, playing to the crowd. $2 million of engineering versus one broke mechanic. I'll take those odds. More laughter. Phones came out to record the moment. The humiliation of Aurora Motors' failed launch was being transformed into entertainment at Jack's expense. Marcus joined in, grateful for the distraction from his own failure. Go ahead, janitor. Show us how it's done. Other employees laughed and clapped. The VIP guests smiled condescendingly. The reporters saw a good human interest story developing. Jack stood frozen in the spotlight of hundreds of eyes and dozens of cameras. His face burned with the familiar shame of being dismissed, mocked, treated as less than human. But something different happened this time. Instead of retreating, Jack touched Maya's silver wrench in his pocket. He thought about his daughter watching the live stream at home, about Sarah, who had always believed in his skills, about all the engines he'd saved and all the problems he'd solved. Most importantly, he thought about the truth, that he knew exactly what was wrong with that car, and he could fix it in minutes. The laughter continued around him, but Jack's mind was already working through the repair sequence he'd need. 10 minutes, Selena repeated mockingly. Fix this masterpiece in 10 minutes and I'll marry you. Jack pulled off his work gloves and stepped onto the stage. The laughter grew louder as Jack walked toward the smoking car. Someone in the VIP section shouted, "This should be good." Another voice called out, "Maybe he'll try turning it off and on again." Selena sat in the driver's seat, enjoying the show she'd created. The cameras loved it. The contrast between her designer dress and his work clothes, between corporate glamour and blue-collar desperation. "Clock starts now," she announced. 10 minutes to save my company's reputation. Jack ignored the mockery. He popped the hood and immediately saw what he'd expected. The oil valve had overheated exactly where the design flaw placed it. The cascade failure had shut down multiple systems, but the root cause was simple. He'd seen this exact problem dozens of times in his garage. Not with $2 million supercars, but the principles were identical. Jack pulled out his small toolkit, basic wrenches and screwdrivers he always carried. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just tools that had served him well for 15 years. The VIP audience watched with amusement as the janitor actually seemed to know what he was doing. His movements were confident, purposeful. He wasn't randomly checking things like the engineers had done. "Look at him go," Marcus said sarcastically. Maybe he learned from YouTube videos. More laughter, but it was becoming less certain. Jack's hands moved with the precision of someone who'd done this work thousands of times. First, he located the overheated valve and carefully released the pressure. Hot oil sprayed briefly, but Jack was ready for it. He'd positioned himself to avoid the worst of it, another sign of experience. Next, he bypassed the electronic sensors that were sending false readings to the main computer. The high-tech diagnostics were actually making the problem worse by triggering additional safety shutdowns. "What's he doing now?" someone whispered. Jack was doing what no engineer in that room would think to try, treating a sophisticated supercar like a regular engine with a simple mechanical problem. He rerouted the oil flow using a technique he'd perfected on racing cars, creating a temporary bypass that would allow the system to function while the faulty valve was isolated. The crowd grew quieter as Jack worked. His confidence was unmistakable. This wasn't guesswork. This was expertise in action. Selena's smile began to fade as she realized the maintenance worker might actually know what he was doing. The entertainment value would disappear if he succeeded, leaving only the embarrassing reality that her company's engineers couldn't solve what a janitor could. "Time," she called out, even though only 6 minutes had passed. "That's 10 minutes. "That's 6 minutes," Jack said calmly, not looking up from his work. "I need 3 more. The audience laughed, but now it was at Selena's obvious attempt to cheat. The cameras had been recording the whole time. Everyone could see the real elapsed time. Jack made his final adjustments and closed the hood. He wiped his hands on his work clothes and looked at Selena. "Try it now." She turned the key reluctantly. The engine caught immediately, purring with smooth power. All the dashboard lights showed green. The electronic systems came online perfectly. The showroom fell absolutely silent. Jack had done exactly what he'd promised. Fixed a $2 million supercar with basic tools and simple mechanical knowledge. In 9 minutes, the silence stretched on as the reality sank in. The CEO who had mocked him, the engineers who had dismissed him, the entire audience who had laughed, they were all staring at the impossible made possible. But Jack wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. On the screen was a photo he'd taken yesterday, the original blueprint showing the flawed valve placement. "There's something else you need to see," he said, his quiet voice somehow carrying clearly through the wireless mic system. He held up the phone so the cameras could capture the image. "This design flaw isn't accidental. It's the result of cutting corners to meet production deadlines." A murmur ran through the crowd. This was bigger than just a mechanical failure. Jack pulled out more photos, internal emails he'd photographed when he'd tried to warn the engineering team. Messages between Selena and Marcus discussing how to work around safety margins and optimize cost effectiveness. "Ms. Moore knew about this problem 3 weeks ago," Jack continued. "The engineering team recommended delaying the launch for safety testing. She overruled them." The room erupted. Reporters surged forward. Camera flashes exploded like lightning. Selena's face went from red to white to green as she realized the scope of what was happening. This wasn't just a mechanical failure anymore. This was a safety scandal being exposed live on camera. "Those are private company documents," she shouted. "You stole confidential information." "I photographed them after you ignored safety warnings," Jack replied calmly. "When a company puts profits over safety, someone needs to speak up." That's when the twist that no one saw coming hit like a thunderbolt. Richard Hawthorne, Aurora Motors' largest investor and board member, stood up in the VIP section. "Ms. Moore," his voice cut through the chaos like a blade, "you've just exposed this company to massive liability, product safety violations, securities fraud, criminal negligence." He turned to address the room. "As of this moment, the board of directors is calling an emergency vote of no confidence in Selena Moore's leadership." The other board members nodded grimly. They'd been watching their investment go up in smoke, and now they had grounds to act. "The vote is unanimous," Hawthorne announced. "Selena Moore is hereby removed as CEO of Aurora Motors, effective immediately." The showroom exploded in chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras captured every angle of Selena's shock and humiliation. The woman who had been mocking a poor mechanic 10 minutes ago was now being fired by her own board in front of hundreds of witnesses. But the cruelest twist was yet to come. As security moved to escort her from the premises, every single Aurora Motors employee, from executives to janitors, stood up and walked out of their seats. They were abandoning her. The same people who had laughed at Jack's expense were now leaving Selena alone on stage, facing the cameras that had captured her downfall. Jack watched from the side of the stage, still holding his daughter's silver wrench. He felt no joy in Selena's destruction, only quiet satisfaction that the truth had finally won. The mechanic nobody respected had just brought down a CEO in less than 10 minutes. Within hours, the story exploded across every platform on Earth. "Poor mechanic saves supercar launch, CEO gets fired," dominated headlines worldwide. The hashtag #TruthMechanic trended globally, inspired by Jack's simple act of exposing the truth. The video that broke the internet showed the devastating sequence. Selena's arrogant laughter as she mocked the broke mechanic, followed immediately by her own board firing her in the same spot 15 minutes later. Meme creators worked overtime. The most popular format showed 2 panels. When you mock the janitor next to Selena's laughing face, and when the janitor destroys your career next to her shocked expression being abandoned by her own employees. The internet was merciless but accurate. From CEO to unemployed in 15 minutes. Plot twist, the mechanic was the hero all along. When keeping it arrogant goes wrong. Corporate edition. Late-night talk show hosts had a field day. "There's a new career path," janitor to corporate whistleblower. Who needs an MBA when you have a wrench? But the real-world consequences were far more serious than internet jokes. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration launched a full investigation into Aurora Motors' safety violations. The SEC began examining securities fraud charges. Aurora's stock price collapsed before markets even opened. Thousands of Aurora employees faced uncertain futures as the company fought to survive the scandal. The planned IPO that would have raised billions was permanently canceled. Industry experts called it the fastest corporate downfall in automotive history. Business schools would study it for decades as a case study in how arrogance and safety violations could destroy a company overnight. Jack tried to avoid the media circus. He wanted to return to his quiet life with Maya, but the world had other plans. Reporters camped outside his small apartment. His phone rang constantly with interview requests, book deals, documentary offers. Everyone wanted to hear from the man who brought down a billion-dollar company with a wrench and moral courage. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The CEO who had treated him as invisible was now unemployable, while the nobody maintenance worker had become one of the most famous whistleblowers in corporate history. Richard Hawthorne, now Aurora's interim CEO, personally visited Jack at his apartment. "Mr. Turner, I want to apologize for how you were treated. You tried to warn us about safety issues, and we should have listened." "I just did what any mechanic would do," Jack replied. "No, you did what most people wouldn't have the courage to do. We'd like to offer you a position, Chief Safety Officer, $300,000 starting salary, full benefits, company car." Jack was quiet for a long moment. Maya could go to the best schools. They could move to a real house. He could stop worrying about rent and groceries. But he thought about all the other maintenance workers, janitors, and service employees who were still invisible to corporate executives, still treated as less than human. "Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne, but I'm not interested in executive positions. I have a different request. Anything. Create a safety review board with mechanics and technicians, not just engineers. People who work with their hands, who see problems from ground level. Give them real authority to stop production when something's dangerous." "Done. What else?" "Set up a scholarship fund for children of working-class families, kids whose parents fix cars, clean offices, maintain buildings. Give them opportunities their parents never had." Hawthorne was amazed. "You could be wealthy and powerful, Mr. Turner. You could run this company. I watch power and wealth corrupt someone completely. I just want to raise my daughter and do honest work." Jack did accept one offer, a book deal with all proceeds going to the scholarship fund he'd requested. He also agreed to work part-time as Aurora's safety consultant, reviewing designs before they reached production. Maya was proud but overwhelmed by the attention. At school, other kids showed her the viral videos of her father. "Daddy," she said one evening as they ate dinner in their small apartment, "why did that mean lady say she would marry you?" "She was making fun of me, sweetheart. She thought I was too stupid to fix important things. But you did fix it." "Yes." "And now she doesn't have a job anymore?" "That's right." Maya considered this seriously, playing with her food. "So your superpower really does work." Jack smiled and touched the silver wrench she'd given him, now famous around the world as the symbol of his victory. "Sometimes it takes a while, but truth and skill always win over lies and arrogance." Meanwhile, Selena Moore had vanished from public life entirely. Her penthouse was sold. Her social media accounts went dark. Former friends and business associates suddenly couldn't remember her phone number. The woman who had built her identity on being untouchable discovered that viral humiliation was the one thing money couldn't fix. Every job interview, every social interaction, every attempt to rebuild her life was haunted by the same 15-minute video. The clip of her mocking laughter, followed by immediate corporate destruction, became permanent internet history. It played in business ethics classes, leadership seminars, and corporate training sessions worldwide. But perhaps the most lasting image wasn't of Selena at all. It was Jack, quietly working under the hood while hundreds of people laughed, then calmly exposing the truth that brought down an empire. The phrase that defined the whole story came from Maya herself, captured by a reporter outside their apartment. "My daddy's superpower is fixing things that are broken, even when nobody believes him. Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones everyone ignores. And sometimes, a silver wrench carries more authority than a corner office." 1 month later, Aurora Motors held its first company-wide meeting since the scandal. The same showroom where Selena had fallen from grace was now filled with employees, investors, and media. But the atmosphere was completely different. Richard Hawthorne stood at the podium where the failed Supercar had once smoked. "Today, we announced the Jack Turner Safety Initiative and the Maya Turner Scholarship Fund, which will provide education for children of working families." Sustained applause filled the showroom. In the back, Jack sat quietly with Maya, both wearing simple clothes among the sea of business suits. "We've also invited Mr. Turner to say a few words," Hawthorne announced. Jack hadn't planned to speak, but Maya squeezed his hand. "Go tell them about fixing things, Daddy." He walked slowly to the center of the stage, the same spot where he'd exposed the truth that changed everything. The room fell completely silent. "I'm not good at speeches," Jack began quietly. "A month ago, I was cleaning tools and getting laughed at by people in expensive suits. I never wanted to be famous or destroy anyone's career." He paused and looked out at the audience. "But my daughter taught me something important. She said fixing things was my superpower. And when something's broken, you don't ignore it just because nobody wants to hear the truth." Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out Maya's silver wrench, the one engraved with love that had become famous worldwide. He held it up so everyone could see. This little wrench fixed a $2 million car. Not because it's magical, but because it represents something simple. Caring enough to do the job right. Instead of placing the wrench on the podium like a trophy, Jack simply slipped it back into his pocket and stepped away from the microphone. "Truth doesn't need a stage," he said. "It just needs someone willing to speak it." He walked back toward Maya, who was beaming with pride at her father. The room remained silent as they headed for the exit together. The mechanic and his daughter, hand in hand, walking away from fame toward their simple life. A photographer captured the moment. Jack's back as he walked away from the podium. Maya looking up at him with pure admiration, the silver wrench just visible in his pocket. The image went viral within hours with the caption, "The mechanic who fixed the truth." It became the defining photograph of the entire scandal. Not corporate drama or executive downfall, but a quiet man walking away from power with his daughter, carrying the tool that reminded the world what really matters. The most important fixes, it turned out, happen when nobody's watching. They just need someone with the right tools and the courage to use them. If you believe that truth can defeat million-dollar lies, hit subscribe Hero Dad Stories for more stories where honesty wins against all odds.